Desde abajo se defiende a todo mundo. Radio Jornalera, donde tu voz encuentra un eco amplificado, donde tus derechos salen a la luz y disipan el miedo, donde tus aportes a la sociedad se evidencian, donde se reconoce que tus luchas reivindican derechos para todas y todos. Radio Jornalera destaca a la gente humilde que pelea por sus derechos a pesar de sus circunstancias de despojo y marginación. Eleva a los individuos y sus luchas y muestra cómo la clase trabajadora y humilde puede ser agente de cambio cuando se organiza, cuando se defiende y cuando tiene una lectura correcta de su propia realidad. Radio Jornalera provee el espacio para aprender de los invitados e invitadas sobre sus vidas, lo que les motiva a seguir adelante, sus virtudes y desafíos y hasta su música y poesía favorita. Radio Jornalera recalca el trabajo de activistas, organizadores, educadores y algunas celebridades, sus causas, sus campañas, sus estrategias, sus tácticas y los reveses más duros en el perenne quehacer de formar líderes para hacer el mundo más justo, más humano, más inclusivo. Para cambiar el mundo, primero hay que conocer a las personas que sobreviven las injusticias y políticas públicas groseras. Hay que apoyar y solidarizarse con sus luchas, porque desde abajo se defiende a todo mundo. Radio Jornalera, donde los anhelos y el sentir del pueblo trabajador cobran vida.
Hello, hello, hello. Hola a todos, bienvenidos a nuestro programa de hoy. Hoy literalmente estoy lo más emocionada que he estado. Este programa de hoy va a ser, ya sé que va a ser increíble, maravilloso. Estoy súper emocionada de dar la bienvenida a nuestra invitada de hoy. Vamos a hacer esto por primera vez bilingüe, así que tengan paciencia con nosotros que vamos a hacer todo para que puedan entenderlo la mayoría de las personas posibles. Hello everyone, I am literally fangirling today over our illustrious guest, Claudia de La Cruz, and I'm just so grateful that you're here. So thank you so much, bienvenida, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Es un placer estar contigo, hablar contigo, Franca, y hablar del programa La Mafalda, o sea, el programa de las Mafaldas. Eso es muy significativo para mí. It's a very strong character in Latin America that I think a lot of us grew up on, and it's very symbolic of the work I think that we have taken up. So I'm very excited to speak with you.
Absolutely. And we're going to analyze. Vamos a analizar una tira, pero primero quiero que nos cuentes, tell our audience, tu historia con la estatuita de Mafalda, your story with Mafalda statue, which is in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. And you've been there.
Yeah, I've been there several times. I have the opportunity and the great honor of working with different social movements throughout Latin America. And there's a platform of social movements that was created in 2005 that is called Alba Movimientos. And we held a meeting in Buenos Aires not too long ago, probably about 2 years ago. And I was very excited to go back to Argentina, but it was a specific mission. I needed to go and find the Mafalda statue because my mom used to call me Mafalda when I was growing up. And, she introduced me to the character, but I never really clicked for me until I became much older, right? I was being Mafalda when I was being rebellious. I was being Mafalda when I was talking back. I was being Mafalda when I was asking questions. And so for me, it was like, yeah, that little girl sounds like me. And she would show me the strips, but I never really, again, kind of, as a feminist, rebellious little girl that, created, rest in peace. And I just went on to I need to find the statue. And I did find the statue and I took a picture of the statue, just hugging her. And the caption read, Encontré mi niña yo, and I sent it to my mom and my mom was celebrating it. Oh my God, you remember. And of course I remember. And now that I know what Mafalda was about, yes, of course I'm a Mafalda for life.
Oh my God, that has to be the quote of the episode, right? I'm a Mafalda for life. Imagine when you get to that. No, I love that so much because it's true. The philosophy of Mafalda and the beauty of it is that, she was born in the 1960s, right? And, she's a precocious child. And how many of us as outspoken women and non-men always get billed as like, all sorts of stuff. And she was like kind of our idol, right? Always also very comprometida con los asuntos sociales, right? Very much about these like social issues, even in the 60s. Then when the dictatorship came in Argentina, there was censorship, but even then Kino got away with a little bit of subverting those things with, with towing that line. So I think popular culture and art is the key in many ways to getting this this info out, these theories out to the masses. And I think Mafalda has been doing that since the 60s. So I'm so glad, because I actually didn't know you had that connection when we first started to schedule this. And now I'm like, it was meant to be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have a strong connection with liberation movements in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so, the dictatorship and the military oppression, repression, and execution of a lot of like revolutionaries in Argentina, in Chile, are part of the history and traditions that I come out of. So in El Salvador también, with Monsignor Romero, yeah. So that's, so when I saw Las Mafaldas, I was like, this is definitely my house. I have to go visit.
I'm so happy. And I love that you mentioned Oscar Romero, and all of these movements, right? Because our liberation struggles are all connected. And I think that's one of the things that has been one of the hardest things for folks on our side, whatever we call it, to get across, right? Is that folks tend to, because of the system, be either isolated or say, oh, if it doesn't affect me, then it's not my problem, that kind of thing. And that, I think you said a key thing, which is that, yeah, like we're all the struggles are connected. It's inconsistent to support fascism in one place and pretend to care about liberation in another. It doesn't, it doesn't compute. So I think that's beautiful. Let's look at our tira for today, which I think is a perfect theme, a perfect kind of overarching thing. If by magic we can get the tira to pop up, and we'll read through it real quick. And there's Mafalda with her little teddy bear and her quintessential globe, right? El globo para Mafalda estaba siempre presente, ¿no? So she says, mira, esto es el mundo, ¿ves? ¿Sabes por qué es lindo este mundo, eh? Porque es una maqueta, el original es un desastre. 1960s, and you can tell by the type of art that this was one of the earlier ones, right? Because he also evolved a little bit in his art. So vamos a analizarla. What do you think? How do we apply that concept to now?
I mean, a maqueta is basically a frame, is an illusion, is something that doesn't have sustenance, doesn't have depth, doesn't have complexity. So in a lot of ways, is the two sides of what reality is reality that is kind of superficial, and then there is the deep, complicated parts of what makes the world a world. The reality in Argentina that was then and it is now, with the current president, who is the epitome of fascist and Zionist, because he's also a Zionist, and just backwards in a lot of ways. It's a reality that is not surfaced in that map, in that world's map. Modi in India is not as a reality that's not, you can't see in that map. You can't see the ongoing conflict and genocide that's happening in Gaza, por ejemplo, at the hands of the occupying forces that is Israel. And you cannot see US imperialism, which has its hands in everything that's happening in Argentina, in Haiti, in Gaza, in Congo, in Sudan, and the list goes on and on. And so that's what she referred to. Like, you can't see what big of a mess this world is, because esto es una maqueta. This is what it, And if you were to turn on the media, it's basically, very similar. Like, we get to see news and hear the horrific things, but somehow our democracy, is safe. and somehow we need to defend our democracy, which is bourgeois democracy. It's not our, it's the democracy of the elite. Una democracia burgués de la clase élite que solo le representa a las corporaciones y a los bancos. Y nos dicen que eso solo pasa en el tercer mundo, ¿verdad? Solo pasa en el sur global. Aquí no,
Sí.
aquí no pasa.
En esos lugares salvajes, no nos dicen. Brillante, like brilliant, you know, and I'm glad you brought up the current situation in Argentina, because we just had the Dia de la Memoria in commemoration of the dictatorship period, you know, the hashtag Nunca Más. And Milei and his people have been putting out propaganda videos in denial of what actually happened. They put out videos that said, no, it wasn't that bad, you know, or like, you know, they're taking away all sorts of, you know, the division of human rights, or all of these divisions that were put in prior, you know, under Kirchnerista governments. So it really is such a backslide. You mentioned El Salvador, we've got a backslide to fascism there. And I guess a question I think you might, you know, have some insight on is how do we not combat, because, you know, obviously they're systemic, but like, how do we keep going, knowing the forces that are at play that are all so joined, right? ¿Cómo seguimos en la lucha cuando se siente cuando es tan difícil mantener la esperanza, ¿no? Cuando hay tantas fuerzas que están trabajando en nuestra contra.
La cuestión es que siempre que haya opresión, siempre va a haber resistencia. Y nosotros tenemos que decidir en un momento clave si vamos a estar del lado del silencio o del lado de la actividad que va a avanzar las luchas. You know, whenever there's oppression, there's resistance, and we have to make the choice of whether we're going to move forward with those who are acting in resistance, or we're going to remain in silence, which ultimately is what feeds oppression. It doesn't save us. It doesn't keep us safe. It really does feed oppression, and it is in their interest, in the interest of those who are doing the oppressing, for us to remain silent, for us to be isolated, for us to be depressed, and to be hopeless. You know, I think for me, I've been doing organizing work for a little bit over 30 years. I started doing work when I was 13 years old. And I started doing organizing work around the freedom of Puerto Rican political prisoners. I'm not Puerto Rican, I'm Dominican, but I am Caribbean. And I do belong to the American continent. And I do live in the world, you know, and the work that we do is kind of like it's our payment for existing in this world. Like, we need to be able to contribute to building a world that is more just, that it has more equity, that allows people to live dignified lives. And so we need to be able to engage in the work in that way, knowing that there's going to be roadblocks. Yo tenía tengo, gracias, todavía está viva, pero una compañera de Chile, Nieves Aires, who was one of the most tortured women in Chile during the dictatorship de Pinochet. She was one of the folks that was captured, who was held for 3 to 4 years, and her reproductive system was completely destroyed by the dictatorship. She then had to exile to Cuba, because Cuba received a lot of the Chilean exiles. And, you know, when she speaks about this, and I've been listening to this woman since I was 13 years old, she always said it: no te van a regalar flores ni chocolates por hacer el trabajo necesario. And she says it with a level of dignity and with a level of strength that strengthens me as a younger person in the struggle. Like, we can expect for the forces of society to come to us with all its might, because we're doing the work that is antithetical. Like, it's completely in opposition to their interests, and they're not just going to be chilled about it. And so I think part of our hope is in the legacy that we hold, the history that we could look back to. Like, we could literally point back to moments of oppression, from moments that were like pre-colonial, to the colonial stages, to the buildup of slavery and US imperialism. All of these moments have had people who have resisted. And the reason we are here as working class people, as Black, Indigenous, Latina, Caribbean people, as workers, is because there have been people before us who have fought and have actually created the path for us. And so we need to be able to have enough hope for the next generation. You know, if we don't have that, then how are we going to pass it along? We need to be able to fulfill ourselves in struggle, in the relationship with our communities, in conversations with our people, in the ways that we learn, in the ways that we teach, in the culture that we are able to have, that nurtures us, that feeds us. We need to seek that, and we can't seek it from our oppressor. Like the whole distractions that they give us right now, they have this whole like Hollywood, the land of pedophiles. We've known that has been there. You know, they're talking about J-Lo. You know, she claims the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. The Bronx doesn't claim her. So like that's all distractions. That is all distractions. But what type of culture actually maintains and sustains us and uplifts us? It's the one that is connected to struggle, is the one that is connected to our lineage, and that allows us to see that throughout history we've had setbacks, but we've advanced, and we've advanced only through organized struggle.
Wow, I'm gonna have a moment here. A lot of what you said, I have a lot of connections. I want to bring up Audre Lorde, the Master's Tools, right? Because what you said about the oppressors aren't going to be the ones to save us, right? Like the Master's Tools will never dismantle the Master's house. I agree so much about the distractions and everything, but I want to have a moment of like, I think gratitude to the universe, because I could cry right now. I have been saying these very things. I'm teaching a class called From Africa to Emancipation right now at my institution. And I take a Pan-Africanist approach to African studies. And all of these things that I teach, and that I have great receptive students now, that hasn't always been the case in my life. And I could cry in how validating it is to hear you say these things, because the system truly does make us feel isolated. It makes us feel a little bit like we are in the twilight, like we are
we're crazy,
too much, the crazy ones, right? And so like, this is an incredible moment. I'm going to take this moment too also to shout out our friend in common who made this happen, Carol Ruiz, another incredible luchadora, like fighter, who like, and we talk about this a lot with her in our circle of like, she's, there's currently a literal fascist dictatorship attempt in the town that we're from, that she is one of the few resistors of. And so we talk a lot about what this looks like in practice, right? We talk a lot in theory, in practice. What does it look like when you're constantly being gaslit, ashamed, pushed out, blah, blah, blah. And so this is a moment that I can appreciate, that we can have this discussion as, as people who are like-minded, who get it, and we're not alone. And just that, I think is already revolutionary, because we don't have a lot of spaces like this where we can be openly just analytical about the reality of the whole world, right? So so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I want to go ahead. Yeah. And I want to, and so you started by talking about being Caribbean, right? You started that segment. And I want to go back to talk about the Haiti thing, the DR and the Haiti thing. That's another thing I'm talking about in my classes on the Caribbean. And so, and you see so much fake news, so much of that imperialist narrative, of that ignorance of the, of the struggle, of what the actual reason is for what's going on. I say this a lot, right? Haiti has had the only successful slave revolt in the history of the world, and they've never been forgiven for it by imperialist powers, right? That's the reality. So, and I saw that you've been posting about that, which was also really inspiring for me. So if you want to talk a little bit about what's going on there and how we can combat some of those, also some of that like propaganda and brainwashing around it.
I mean, I think it's important to know is the first successful Black revolution that took place in 1804, and Haiti had to pay reparations. Imagine that. A country that was exploited, that was enslaved, that was resources were extracted from, they had to pay their oppressor reparations. And then that debt was transferred to Citibank in the United States. So it was transferred from the colonial powers of France to the imperialist powers of the United States. And the United States has invaded Haiti many, many times since the beginning of the 19th century. Like, it's crazy, right? So Haiti 20 years ago, in 2004, was basically invaded by the United States. Politically, there was a coup that took place, a US-backed coup, who forced to exile the first popularly elected government of Aristide, who's also a liberation theologian. And Haiti has been in chaos ever since. You've had the UN military, and there were, Brazilian military. You had military from other places around the region, and also the different countries of the world occupying Haiti. And right now, it's, you hear the news, the gangs, these gangs are being paid for by the US government. Simple. They are being paid for by the US government. There was the killing of an imposed president that took place, and there was an interim president who's not there anymore, who's actually kicked out and now is in Puerto Rico, as far as I know. But all this chaos has been developed by US imperialism. And people may say, but why Haiti? Like, Haiti doesn't have anything that the United States might want. Actually, Haiti has a lot that the United States wants. It's a very strategic point. And since the moments of colonialism, it was at a strategic point for waging war against the rest of the region. It's basically at the heart of the Caribbean. Haiti you're very easily landing in Cuba if you wanted to. You're very easily landing in Venezuela if you wanted to. And so it's very strategic for US imperialism to take hold of Haiti. And that is despite, this is in addition to, not despite, in addition to the resources, the natural resources that Haiti has. And so it's been an exploited, it's been militarized, it's been highly punished population and land because they decided to be free in 1804. And they were actually being successful in that process. So successful that they aided Venezuela, Simón Bolívar, when Simón Bolívar came to Haiti asking for military support, weapons, and finance. Like, Haiti was there for them. And Haiti was there for other regions as well. Not only in this continent, but around the world. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the reason why they didn't want Haiti to succeed is the same reason why the United States doesn't want Cuba to succeed. It's the same reason why they don't want Venezuela to succeed. Because for as long as they're able to succeed in their independent projects, they are a reference to people fighting here. If socialism advances in Cuba and the blockade is lifted, a blockade that costs Cubans $15 million a day. $15 million a day for over 60 years has been over $160 billion. If they were to allow Cuba to breathe and develop their socialist economic project, is a threat to the United States, because people will start looking to Cuba as an example of what could happen if we were under socialism in the United States. And that's not what they want. They don't want us to look at liberation or freedom. Same thing with Palestine. If Palestine were to free itself from the colonial rule of Israel, that is a defeat to US imperialism. And so again, I think, Haiti is just an example of what happens in history when people decide to be free from colonialism and free from US imperialism. And now the United States is very much wanting to invade. They want feet on the ground. They quieren entrar para restaurar la democracia. Pero la falta de democracia que existe en Haití, la falta de orden político, económico, cultural que está en Haití, eso no le toca a los Estados Unidos restaurar, le toca al pueblo haitiano restaurar. Like the Haitian people need to restore and build a project that is a national project. It's a Haitian solution for Haitian problems. The United States has no business putting their hands in there.
Thank you so much. Again, so much of that stuff has like so many like hilos que podemos no agarrar. Quería mencionar lo de Bolívar porque that's a little known fact is that like Bolívar, is this, champion of liberation in the history of the, all these wars for independence. But without Haiti's help, Bolivar wouldn't have gotten half of the stuff that he did if that. And that's little known history. I also am glad you mentioned the genocidal blockade of Cuba, because that's another one where the narrative gets twisted to be like, see, like that's what happens under communism. It's like, no, that's what happens when you have a genocidal blockade. Let's not get it twisted. Another thing I say a lot too is, if your system is so good, US imperialism, right? If your system is so good, why do you always have to impose it by terror? And if it was so good, wouldn't people want it?
Claro,
¿No?
claro. O sea, el concepto de la democracia, vamos, pero acá no hay democracia. O sea,
No,
¿cómo vas a exportar lo que no tienes? Aquí no hay democracia. Si hubiera democracia, o sea, el proceso electoral sería diferente. No habría necesidad de suprimir votos. ¿Qué pasa? Pasa y ha pasado históricamente. No hubiera el ataque a las comunidades migrantes que vienen a trabajar y a contribuir a la economía de este país. O sea, no hubiera un ataque en los derechos civiles de las mujeres, de la comunidad LGBTQ. O sea, hubieran tantas otras cosas si realmente creyéramos en la democracia en este país. But in this country, the ruling class does not believe in working class people's democracy. Their democracy is a ruling class democracy that serves the banks, that serves the corporations, and that serves US imperialism. And for as long as that is the case, they will continue to invade and extract. Anteriormente lo hacían a través de los dictadores. Y ahora es la oligarquía de los países. O sea, la oligarquía, los ricos de los países, de nuestros países, son los que están controlando y son puppets, they're puppets de lo que es las democracias de los Estados Unidos. O sea, y tenemos que tener eso bien, bien claro. Milió en Argentina, el presidente de la República Dominicana, el presidente de El Salvador, vienen aquí, se reúnen con cualquier presidente, sea Biden o Trump, y ellos son los que le dan la directriz de lo que tienen que hacer. Los Estados Unidos no quiere bregar con un AMLO, porque AMLO le dice, ustedes quieren que paremos el tema de la migración, entonces deje que Cuba respire. Lift the blockade. Lift the sanctions on Venezuela. If you want the migration to stop, then you stop that. No quieren bregar con un AMLO así. No quieren bregar tampoco con un Lula. No, o sea, because these are people that stand on their own feet and they stand very firmly for the right of Latin America and the Caribbean to live without the repression of US empire. And they could do it because their economies are the biggest economies in Latin America. Que era también lo que hacía Chávez cuando la industria petrolera le daba la fuerza. Con las sanciones ya eso ha bajado, enormemente ha decrementado eso. Pero lo que Chávez empezó con el ALBA TCP, con el Mercosur, con todos estos procesos regionales que eran una alternativa, pues creó otra forma de hacer cosas en Latinoamérica. Y si los Estados Unidos realmente creyeran en la soberanía y en la democracia, no se hubiese puesto como obstáculo al desarrollo de esos procesos.
No, exactamente. Se llenan la boca, ¿no? Con la democracia y la libertad, pero yo les digo todo el tiempo como, ¿dónde está? ¿Dónde está en este país donde ni siquiera tenemos que, we don't have to look as far as redlining and suppression, just the fact that voting day is on a random Tuesday where only certain people can afford to have off, right? So go vote already, right? And we're going to go back to that because I want to talk about your campaign. But first, I just want to touch upon one thing that I think is a brilliant connection too. When you mentioned earlier the gangs, right? In Haiti, and you also mentioned in Salvador. And I want to pause on that because one of the things that I find also very maddening is the way that this dictator of El Salvador is being billed as this like hero of cleaning up the streets and like all that stuff. And you mentioned the gangs are paid for by the US, right? Like this goes back for like, right, like the original gangs were created in, you know, in the United States, then exported, and that's just the reality of it. Not to mention the history of gangs as they existed in the US was to protect the people the police wasn't willing to protect. So we also don't talk about that enough, right? So just to touch upon like that modern, you know, that modern dictatorship where now they can no longer get away with the type of meetings in the US of the School of the Americas, let's say, just for an example, but their meetings are now about cryptocurrency or money or economy, but really they're just getting the playbook for continuing that dictatorship, right? So just a little bit about that El Salvador situation, because it's maddening how many people truly fall for it.
No, and it's crazy because the mass incarceration model that the United States has here has also been exported to El Salvador. Like, and the privatization of prisons has also been exported to El Salvador. And so what they do here to working class people, to Black, brown, indigenous people specifically, is it serves as a lab. It serves like as a test that then will be exported. And the concept of democracy, that it's a ruling class democracy, has been exported by US capitalism and imperialism. Mass incarceration and policing in the ways in which we know it and experience it here, which are disproportionately impacting Black, brown, and poor communities, also white poor communities, is also being exported. The reality of gangs in prisons, like La Mara, that was something that was created here, and it was then, you know, exported to Central America. That wasn't created in Central America. That came from here. When we talk about the drugs and the war on drugs, like one of the biggest narco states was the United States of America.
Yeah,
Let us not forget that. You know,
Mhm.
and so I think it's important for us to have a level of collective memory and debunk these national myths that somehow the United States is benevolent and somehow, you know, in God we trust. The United States does not trust in God. And I can say that as a theologian. Their God is profit. That is what their God is. And so I think we need to, again, start debunking these myths that somehow make our people seem like criminals, like animals, like when in reality, the real criminals and terrorists are in the Pentagon, are in the White House, and are in Senate and Congress. Like, so I feel like, you know, that history is important in so many ways to be able to analyze and frame what's currently happening in El Salvador, you know, the migration from Cuba and Venezuela, and why people are leaving, which is not very different from the economic reasons of countries like my country, like the Dominican Republic. People migrate because they want a better life. And if the United States doesn't allow these countries to develop their political and economic programs as they should, without having to have the IMF involved, without having to have the World Bank involved, without having to have, you know, all sorts of like aid that then turns into enslavement, if they don't allow these countries to live and develop, the migration will continue to happen.
And then they destabilize, they do all these things, right? And then they turn around and say, no, you can't come here, right? Which
Of
is
course,
another thing we have to dismantle. I'm glad you brought up the drug thing, because we talk a lot about like, oh, these drugs and whatever. And like when you look at who the consumer is of those drugs of those narco states, it's the US. You know what I mean? That's like the number one consumer. So you look at that. And just, you know, how much of this is so important in terms of, as you said, just unlearning that conditioning, that brainwashing, that like a lot of my work is around decentering, and we do decenter around whiteness and straightness, but also we have to decenter, as you just said, that US centrism, that US, like, you know, arrogance of we're the best country in the world and everyone wants to be us and everyone wants to be like us, right? And I think that's what I say a lot, that education is the key to liberation, but not in an institutional sense, in like the people watching this interview or having a discussion with whoever, you know, like talking about this more. I think one of the most brilliant things that has me so excited about your campaign, that I've been sharing everywhere, like with all, like everywhere I go, is because I don't think in my lifetime I've seen, and this is, I think, a sign of the needle moving, right? a presidential candidate so openly like post and say publicly things like US hands off Haiti, like, you know, lift the blockade in Cuba, like those things for a long time, and they still are taboo, don't get me wrong, but for a long time, even my own personal history with the dictatorship, like when we first moved here, when I was a kid, there was a long time where we could not talk about it. You know what I mean? We're on all sorts of CIA lists. I could, you know, and because it was like, you know, oh, could we even, now it's been fairly recently within the past maybe 5-10 years that I've been like sharing the story more for folks to make connections between imperialism and racism and sexism and homophobia and all those things. So I think that education piece is one of the greatest things about your campaign. And you mentioned, you know, no matter who's president, Biden or Trump. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because a lot of people, as you know more than me, the response when another candidate comes is like, oh, but don't you want to throw away your vote? Like, vote for Biden. We'll push him left. It's been 4 years. He's only been pushed farther right. So what are we doing?
That's
so
right.
Talk a little about what it's like to be a candidate, and also like what made you want to do it, and, you know, some of the goals and everything of what y'all are doing with this campaign, which I think is great.
What made you be a candidate?
What made you say, I'm going to dismantle this? Because honestly, it's work. You got your work cut out for you.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I've been doing organizing work for more than half of my life. So I've been engaged in organized struggle around many issues domestically. So the right to housing, the right to healthcare, immigrant rights, LGBTQ rights, anti-police brutality, against mass incarceration, you name it. All of these struggles. At the root of all of these struggles is capitalism. At the root of all of our grievances and misery is capitalism. And therefore, we need to be able to tackle the issues from the root. Yo no sé si en Argentina lo decían mucho, pero el tema de atacar la enfermedad y no la fiebre. Like, you know, you have to be able to attack the illness and not what the symptoms are. It was very kind of the predominant saying in my house growing up, and also in the political spaces that I was being formed. And so I developed anti-capitalist politics from being born in an immigrant family that was working class. My dad, the first time that I heard the word laborer, you know, obrero, was from my dad, because he worked construction. You know, the hands are cracked, the knees are messed up. And so he was very clear in terms of the class that he was a part of and that we were a part of, you know. My grandmother grew up during the dictatorship in the Dominican Republic. She was born in 1932, which was a year after the dictatorship of Trujillo was established. She worked the sugarcane fields. She worked the rice fields along the side of Haitians as a child. And so all of that formed my understanding of, again, US capitalism and how it is expressed in other countries, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so when you ask the question, like, why would you choose, or what would you kind of take up the task of doing this, is because I owe my people that much. Like, their fight, their struggle is mine as well. And it will be that after this election year, because it's been that for my whole entire life. And so I'm part of a political organization, a political party that's called the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And we do our processes democratically. We utilize the process of democratic centralism. And myself, Claudia, and Karina, who's my running mate, were nominated to become the president and vice president candidates for the campaign, because we've been running campaigns since 2016 and maybe even earlier. As socialists, we understand that historically socialists have intervened in the electoral politics, knowing that the electoral politics within capitalism is a sham. That they're not just creating spaces for you to get up and debate as a socialist, the Democrats and the Republicans, we know is a sham. We know that there are obstacles, and we also have faith in our people. We also have faith in organized struggle. We also understand that when we talk about the material conditions of people, that there is an economic crisis, that people cannot afford to buy eggs, bread, and whatever it is that they need, that people cannot afford to put gas in their cars, pay their mortgage, because ultimately everything is all the prices are going up, and their wages are either remaining the same or they're losing their employment. We know that people are feeling very deeply the fact that our tax dollars are being placed to murder children in Gaza, that people have kind of had there's been an unveiling of the brutality of capitalism and US imperialism as it relates to support of colonialism. And what other moment in history could be a better moment to be able to say we have the option of building a movement that is independent from this world, that ultimately is going to lead us to destruction, the destruction of humanity and the destruction of the planet. It is in this moment that as socialists, as revolutionaries, as progressive people, we need to be able to say, we are not okay with this. We're not okay with the ways in which the ruling class continues to violate, continues to attack, continues to kill us literally, to be able to safeguard capitalism and imperialism. And so if we wait and continue to legitimize them over and over and over again, our liberation gets further and further. So this is the moment for us to intervene politically. And I think, the party for Socialism and Liberation had an accurate analysis, because we didn't know that October 7th was going to happen. We didn't know that it would change history, because it has changed history. We did not know that people were going to shift massively, progressively on the side of justice. But we understood that at some point, somehow, something was gonna explode. Whether it was the labor movement, whether it was a student movement, whether it was women's rights, because we are under the very, very heavy boot of capitalism. And again, like I said before, every time there's oppression, there's resistance. And we're betting that our people would resist. And so we launched this campaign with the understanding that we needed to uplift the voices of our communities in struggle, that we needed to uplift the demands of our communities in struggle, that we needed to say, we need to extract and take back the money that we've collectively produced that allows billionaires, which are very few, to live luxurious lives. What would it look like if Amazon workers owned their place of work? If their money, the money that they produce, is placed back to give them benefits so that they don't have to be engaged in 12-hour shifts. If the technology that is utilized now to get them off the work, off their jobs, actually is utilized so that they could work less and still be paid the wage that they're supposed to be paid. What would it mean to take, control a big pharma and take the profit motive out and have people actually access medicine without having to deal with the profit motive, which is actually what bankrupts people? How about we treat healthcare as a human right and not a business? How about we take the health insurance companies out and people don't have to worry about having health insurance when they go into a medical office? How about, all of these things are possible because this country has enough money. The workers in this country produce enough money for that to be a reality. But the billionaires, the corporations, the bankers, they take away the possibility for us to live dignified lives. And when we talk to people like that, people understand. Then the next question is how do we do it? And historically, you've needed independent movements of working class people, and you've needed independent political instruments. but we have to make them. We have to create them. And the longer we wait to create those, the further our liberation is. And that's the purpose of our campaign. So when we talk to working class people in different communities, be them in New York, Boston, Los Angeles, in Virginia, or in South Carolina, people understand it because people are suffering. And organized struggle is the biggest threat to the ruling class. And it has been through elections like this, through third-party processes, through socialist campaigns, that the ruling class has felt compelled to give concessions. For example, during the 1930s in this country, which were the times of the Great Depression, it was the communists who were actually involved in labor union, labor organizing. They were involved in tenant rights. They were involved in organizing students, organizing communities. And it was because of them that the Great New Deal was a possibility, because capitalism was in crisis and they wanted to save capitalism. And rather than have a revolution take place with communists at the head, they decided to move in a progressive, liberal way. And so we are moving more and more to the far right, whether it's Biden or Trump, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. The move in this country is further to the far right. And if we don't do something, they will continue to move to the far right. We have to be able to put the pressure on. If we don't put the pressure on politically and as an organized force, capitalism will end us.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and I love that your merch and your website and all of your spaces are so openly, with that message that's simple and it's clear, like end capitalism before it ends us, the all of these things that like feel like, as you're speaking, these are all the things I've always been about and fought for and stuff. And I always question why it is that these things that feel to me like they're so common sense, wanting people housed, wanting people fed, wanting people with healthcare, right? Like just very basic stuff, basic rights at work, are seen as so radical or so like against this. Don't do this. We have to appeal to the moderates and blah, blah. And like, meanwhile, what we're seeing is that fascistification of the whole system, right? That shift. Which I think I agree that the way to do it is through organization. It goes back to that connection piece we talked about. We see how dangerous it is to the system to organize when we see all these union busting movements, all these like attempts, and how much money these corporations put into busting any sort of semblance of an organizing movement, right? I also wanted to touch upon the fact that you said, it goes beyond this election, because a lot of folks, mostly liberals and farther right people, will say like, they vote and then they pat themselves on the back, and then 4 years go by, they do nothing in between. And one of my biggest things is like, if you vote, then that has to be the bare minimum, and then in between you've gotta, right, like work towards something. that work can't just be once every 4 years. So all of these things are amazing. And I need to know how remarkable it is. And we don't do identity politics, right, without intersectionality. But I do want to mention that, because it's been, for many of us, I'm sure many of our listeners will relate to being women who are whatever they call us, too much, too loud, too, outspoken. And I think it's remarkable that y'all are two women who are young, right? Because we're also used to seeing old white men always at the face of politics and all this, right? Who are, marginalized in different ways, but are also not scared, not afraid to back down. There is a misogynist component here that we do need to address, that like, it's remarkable that in these movements that we see a lot of women and non-men taking that work on, despite, the narcissism and whatever that we're faced with, that I think is definitely at least worth mentioning, right? What it's like to be a woman in these spaces, on top of having the viewpoints. People might take a white male socialist more seriously than someone that looks like us, right? And that's something that's remarkable, I think.
I think, I also feel like a lot of it has to do with our own contradictions and the ways in which we've internalized the narrative that seriousness looks a certain way and that wisdom looks a certain way. And I feel like, it is true that some people will say, well, you all are great, you all sound amazing, you're saying all the right things, but you're not going to win. And it's also depending on what the definition of winning is. Like, we want it all. Somos los de abajo y venimos por todo. Like, we're not here for a seat at the table. We want the whole damn house because it's our house, because we built a house. And so, and we say that unapologetically, and we say it boldly, because we understand that we are beyond any repair of capitalism. It is unrepairable. No amount of reform will change the basis on which capitalism is built, which is exploitation, extraction, and destruction of humanity and the planet. That is it. Nothing will change that, because if it changes, it means that capitalism ceases to exist. And that's what we want. We want capitalism to cease to exist. And so, people will have a lot of things to say. But I also find, and as someone who has been doing this work for a long time, and people who have been doing organizing in different fronts of struggle could also probably agree with me, that it is the people who do the least that talk the most. That have the most of things to say and theorize, and, well, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. And while I respect everybody, if you're not accountable to a political project, if you're not accountable to a community, then you need to do something more than talk. It's simple. We are attempting to actually transform society from its roots. And that takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of time, and it also takes a lot of sacrifice. And if you're unwilling to sacrifice, then there's little that you have to say or contribute. Karina and I are both mothers, so we have children. Karina has a 5-year-old and I have a 9-year-old. A 9-year-old that is going on 14. That has many questions, that is very vocal because he's been taught to express himself. And I want a different world for my child. I want a different world for Karina's baby. I want a different world for the babies of the world, for the babies in Gaza, for the babies in Congo, for the babies everywhere. Like, they deserve to have a childhood. They deserve to be protected. They deserve to have access to education, access to housing, access to healthcare. And if you don't agree with that, then what type of human being are you? And if you don't agree with the fact that all these things are human rights and they should not be negotiable, and they should not be a price tag attached to it, then what human being are you? And I am uninterested in speaking with human beings that do not act as human beings, whose humanity has been slashed and has been perverse so much that they don't believe that everyone in this country and everyone in this world has basic human rights that need to be respected. And it's very simple. Like, you don't need to be a socialist to be able to, get the benefits of a socialist society. I mean, who wouldn't want free education? Who wouldn't want free healthcare? Who wouldn't want their retirement secured? Who wouldn't want access to housing where you don't have to pay 70% of your income to have a house or an apartment secured to you and your family? I think everyone who's working class and poor would like that. The only people who benefit from us not having it and who do not want us to have it are the people who profit from it. Mm-hmm. That profit from having a price tag attached to all of these things that are human basic rights. And we need to be conscious of how much these people from generations and generations have lied to us and have taught us to hate ourselves and people who look like us. Like, we are more competent. You and I, Richard, who's on the back doing the tech, Caro, any working class person is more competent to have the presidency of this country than the bastards that are actually now empowered. Like, we all have more capacity. Like, how are you going to have degrees coming from elite institutions and you cannot solve the issue of housing in this country? How are you going to have, degrees from elite institutions and you talk about the economy as if, oh, the economy is doing great when the majority of people are suffering in this country? It's ridiculous. And so we have to wake up and we have to give ourselves more credit that we as working class people who produce everything in this country, like the working class people in general all over the world, produce everything, that we also have the capacity to run the world, that we have the capacity to run this country because we make it run.
Absolutely. I mean, I literally, like, that is the perfect mic drop moment. I want to make sure we clip every single thing from this interview that you've said, because I think it's brilliant. I think it's validating. I think it really is that simple. And our job is to just get the information to folks, right? Like, get this stuff out there, like just basic. That's what I love too about the campaign, that y'all do so many events that are just outreach, right? Just outreach, just talking to people, like putting these things in plain sight on social media, like easy to understand posts, because like it or not, social media is the way that a lot of people get their main source of information. So being able to be out in those spaces, I think is incredible. So, and speaking of social media, I want to make sure we try to get the account here to follow is Claudia _Carina 2024. Okay, follow them on Instagram. Also, votesocialist2024.com is the website. Hopefully we'll have time to get it up there. If not, we'll maybe put it in the notes or something like that. But please, I mean, buy the merch too, because it's amazing to walk around with a bag that says "End Capitalism." And I think those types of conversation starters and having people that look like us say these things does matter, because people see us as, we talked a little bit before we started recording about the philosophy behind liking makeup and liking pink things and things that are feminine and less serious, and also being about it, right? Because we're used to seeing only this type of aesthetic or narrative can be serious, right? So I think that that's another beautiful thing about y'all, is that it's the face of the people, right? It's the face of the people, and there's more of us than there are of them, believe it or not. So let's get together, and I think that's the most beautiful message.
No, I agree. I think just, I want to appreciate you for inviting us to be here and to be in conversation. I think that the biggest point of our campaign is getting people activated. We want people to get activated. We are in a very historical moment, not because it's election year. We're in a historical moment because consciousness is shifting, because people are becoming more and more progressive based on the fact that their needs are not being covered. And this is the best moment for people to become politically active and to build outside of the dominant structures of the Democrats and the Republicans, to go beyond electoral politics and actually engage in everyday politics, engage in everyday struggle, in organized struggle in their communities. And if we don't make that push now, we're going to digress many years. We're going to go back many years, and we can't afford that. Our kids can't afford that.
I love that so much. Claudia, I cannot thank you enough. I cannot thank the universe enough for making this happen, Carol enough, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I have a feeling we're going to connect further and maybe, share ideas on stuff, because I think that this is the most excited I have been for a campaign in a very, very, very long time in this country. So seriously, like, desde el corazón, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for joining us, for continuing to do the work that you do. And we'll see y'all out there. Thank you so much for everyone for listening. Please share this video. A thing you could do if you're fired up and if you're motivated and inspired by what the knowledge Claudia has imparted on us. Share wherever you're watching this. Watch on YouTube, listen on Spotify, on all the different platforms, okay? And share it. Share it with folks, share it with people individually. Don't just share it to your stories. Like, send it to people. We need to get these types of messages out there. And I honestly think people will truly listen if we're the ones making those connections for them. So thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you to our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we'll see you. Nos vemos pronto. Adiós.
Quieres frutos de mis manos, sin ver mi humanidad. Si gozas de mi trabajo, yo merezco igualdad.
En Radio Jornalera no restamos ni dividimos, sumamos corazones.